Hello and welcome to episode 232 of the Crate and Crowbar. It is the 15th of February 2024 at the time of recording. My name is Chris Thurston and joining me this evening is Jamie Britton.
Hello.
Hello. Hi. How are you?
I'm not bad. I said hello louder than I did the sound check just then, just to kind of screw with you, apparently.
I didn't have this much anxiety about waveforms when we used to record the podcast in person, and I knew what the fuck was going on. But as you were noting before we started recording, Jamie, the software we use for this changes its entire UI, its entire web interface every hour. It's impossible to keep track. But I've noticed that my own waveform, as it unfolds before me, has a kind of motion blur effect on it. And that is not necessary at all. And it's freaking me out. It's like I'm talking real fast, which I am, but not in that sense.
Yeah, I was just momentarily hypnotized by my own waveform and how much bigger it is than yours.
Well, it's not a competition, all right? Mine is small but fast, like a rogue might be. Here's the thing. We've had a bit of a weird couple of weeks we're recording these podcasts, and so this is going to be a weird kind of an episode. If it wasn't already clear from the first 90 seconds of this recording, we're going to do something a little bit different this week, aren't we?
Yes. So I took it upon myself, because I'm a diligent little boy, to record a little mini-sode podcast where I talked through some games that I'd played recently, namely 2 train games and then a bunch of the Steam Next Fest games, most of which were sort of horror-y, walking simulatory type things. And then we wondered whether or not we might actually just roll those into this episode and play them on a little tape, and then we could maybe chat about them after past Jamie has finished rambling on about them.
Yeah, so what we're going to do is reach some sort of inflection point that makes sense for us today, right now, in the 15th of February, and then flash back to Jamie talking to himself for 25 minutes. But wonderfully, I listened to it yesterday and enjoyed myself very much, and hopefully you will as well. And then we'll jump back. For us here, right now, on the Thursday that this is, no time at all will pass. But for you, the listener, 25 minutes. Have I explained this enough?
I think you've explained it, yeah.
Okay, good. All right. I don't know if we need to signal this. I tell you what, I leave it to you, Marsh Davies, to determine the dignity with which this transition needs to occur. Now, join Jamie in the past as he discusses the following.
So, to start us off, I just want to talk quickly about a couple of train games. So, over Christmas, I bought my daughter some Brio train sets, which are the kind of standard wooden train sets that you buy little kids, right? And there's been some like creepy industry fixing between all the different manufacturers of train sets because they all fit with each other, which is glorious in this era of needing one widget to put another widget on a widget. I really appreciate that. So I was able to buy like some colossal sacks of Brio bricks and Thomas the Tank Engine bricks from eBay and present them to my daughter, my 2-year-old daughter, who of course immediately was instantly bored with them and wanted to play with something else. But the part of my brain that was neurotypical on Christmas Day, that isn't neurotypical, sorry, the part of my brain which is neurodiverse, immediately went into overdrive, and I had an amazing time on Christmas Day when I probably should have been looking after my children or cooking dinner or plotting future outrage with my parents. I spent quite a lot of time on the floor with the Brio train set, trying to optimize as much as possible and use every bit of track, right? That is what we do with a Brio train set. That is what we're put here on Earth to do. We'd also purchased a couple of bespoke bits, so there was a bell that goes ding when the train goes over it, which is pretty goddamn good. Some like furnishings, that's what they call in the train biz, right? Furnishings, some trees and people, and also a train that goes round on its own and has a little controller lever. I know, it's pretty good. So I just had an amazing time with that. I was occupied for like 2 hours. My partner was like, I've never seen you concentrate so much at anything, which hurt. And I wondered if there was a game that possibly could provide the same thrills without the need to take up a huge amount of floor real estate, which would be better served by dolls and shit. So I did a cursory Google and added the word Reddit at the end of it. And I said, what is the best model train game? And the first answer that came up, which I immediately purchased off Steam, is a game called Rolling Line, which I had never heard of before, and is one of those things which is just amazing. It's one guy making it, and what it is you are put into a virtual room, I guess a garage, and you are given a huge amount of tools to build a model train set. It's one of those games that's completely unlike anything else I've ever played, in that you are in a pretend garage, I guess, although everything in this you can customize. You can put a table down. You can change the colour on the cloth of that table. You can then set about in a kind of virtual environment, which has a sort of physical space, and this game has recently been updated to have VR capabilities. So you're basically able to build the model train track and scene of your dreams, possibly nightmares, with no limits or physical laws on how you go about doing it. Some people have made some absolutely incredible constructions on there, and the examples that they give you as you start the game are amazing. And one of the things you can do is at any moment you can press a button and zoom into the world yourself like a tiny Beetlejuice and go around on the trains and toot the horns and pull the levers, and it's pretty good. I found it more or less unplayable because the physical space setting of the whole thing is just kind of insane. Like, it's just entirely bespoke. It doesn't really correspond to any other games I've played before. The tools that you have, it has this kind of very complicated system involving kind of selecting an area of the space that you want to edit and then editing it with your various tools and then kind of locking that into position. And it just gave me an immediate headache. And I couldn't play it at all. I enjoyed having a tootle round on the tracks that had been provided for the player, but ultimately it was making my brain really feel like it was being cooked. That said, it's one of those games that almost makes me want to weep with how much effort that has gone into something as gloriously nerdy and bespoke and as individual as that. And I was happy to spend money on it. I haven't refunded it because I just, I want that game to go on forever and become ever more complex and turn into the next Roblox, possibly. So I then Googled slightly more intently. I Googled with a bit more focus. Is there a game that simulates the experience of laying down Brio train tracks? Now, there absolutely is. It's called Tracks, the train set game. Almost as if their SEO was perfectly employed for my needs there in terms of how they named that game. Anyway, I got this game, Tracks, the train set game, and my God, is it great. So what you do is you're basically given a kind of void, but a friendly void, a nice void. You can change the colour of the void, and you can make it rain, and you can make it shine, and all that sort of stuff. And then you are just given some relaxing music to listen to, and an endless, infinite amount of Brio-style train tracks to lay down as you please. And it has just been such a pleasure to fire up on the Steam Deck. It's also on Switch, I think, and just build the Brio train set, yes, of my dreams. Put houses around it, build mountains, build roads. You can have it so that passengers can get on and off the trains and go to their corresponding businesses. You can automate the track in all sorts of unusual ways. You can have animals. You can ignore the train track building entirely and just focus on making a ridiculously complicated system of farms and houses and stadiums and all manner of things. They just give you a lot of pieces and a lot of bricks and just tell you to have fun. There is a game mode of it which gives you some sort of simulated environments, like a kind of bedroom set or I didn't even look further than the first one, to be honest, and says like build a track between these 2 points and drop off this many passengers or that many passengers. But to be honest, I have just been so happy clicking and clacking my Brio bits together. You can also, this seems to be a key component of the toy train fantasy, you can go into the train, you can toot the horn, and you can put bits down that go bing when your train goes over them, which was what I wanted. So I actually really recommend both of those games, especially Tracks, the train game. I just think it's glorious. There's been a couple of DLCs which are only a couple of quid, which have expanded it quite a bit, and I think the new DLC adds like sci-fi stuff, aliens, things like that. It's ridiculous. But yeah, I just think there's something really lovely about Brio. There's something about the limitation it applies to the world of trains, and it feels kind of freeing. I don't have the mind that's ever going to be able to really make something complicated, or the artistic ability to make something beautiful in that world. But being able to make something a bit functional and a bit silly looking with a nice kind of barriers behind, of how far you can go with that. Yeah, just lovely. Trains, the train set game. So yeah, I just wanted to mention those games as not normally games I would normally play. There are loads and loads of train games out there, obviously, of varying complexity. But it was nice to find a game that absolutely served the specific fantasy that I had. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the Steam Next Fest, which is currently ongoing and will probably still be going by the time you hear this. I've played a few games in there and really enjoyed what I've played. So I'll start off with Mouthwashing. So Mouthwashing is a first-person indie horror game set on a spaceship that's flying somewhere with a large cargo. It's a very short demo, which I really recommend people play because actually I don't want to spoil what happens in it. But the horror that it conjures is incredibly specific and really, really horrible. At which point the kind of demo is mostly finished. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what they do with the main game. It has that kind of graphical quality of a PlayStation 1 game, possibly. But it's just one of those things that's so unusual and so sort of bespoke and so clearly the product of a completely insane mind that I'm just really interested in playing that game when it eventually drops. I looked into that developer's back catalogue and I'm sort of slightly wish I hadn't, because the game that they made previously, which you can play for free on Steam right now, is called How Fish Is Made, which is a a game where you play as a fish flopping through the bowels of a factory. It's almost like What Happened Next after that sequence in What Remains of Edith Finch. So you play a horrible fish flopping its way along various conveyor belts, occasionally greeting other fish. There is a sequence where one of those fish parasite disgusting things that exist in the tongue of other fishes sing a song to you, which made me almost fall over laughing. It was just hilarious. And then a philosophical question at the end, which is posed. I mean, I don't even know what to say about the ending of that game. It is nice to see something that is genuinely crazy. And then I noticed this game had a DLC. This free game had a DLC, which is actually longer than the base game and more gamey than the base game. And that one's called The Last One and Then Another. Which, again, I don't want to talk too much about because I actually think there's a lot of joy in discovering what's going on in that game or what you're doing in that game. All I'll say is it riffs on a very specific, beloved game from a couple of decades back in genuinely horrible ways. Yeah, I really recommend Mouthwashing, How Fish Is Made, and the DLC of How Fish Is Made, The Last One and Then Another. They're a really quite unnerving and hilarious way to spend a couple of hours. Another game I played is Dreamcore. I think this is one of the ones that's caused a few Twitterings and Xings and various social media rings around it. It's the game which is a sort of first-person simulator, an FPS without the shooting, a walking simulator, based around this idea of liminal spaces. Like, liminal space stuff is one of those discourses that I think annoys quite a lot of people because, you know, there's various Twitter accounts which will post, you know, post pictures of a lamppost on the outskirts of somewhere and go, liminal pictures with threatening auras, etc., etc. I have to admit, I actually really like that kind of liminal spaces aesthetic, even though the English literature dropout in me wants to sort of grab these people by the lapels and say, that's not really what liminal spaces really means, you silly. So I didn't have high hopes for Dream Core. I thought it would probably be a bit of a gimmick, and then that would fall flat. But again, I was really impressed with the actual experience of playing it. So when you start the game up, you are dropped into this space, which is essentially a series of swimming pool type locations, all sort of marbled in that kind of tiled way of swimming pools around the world, with that sort of weird washed out, faintly blurry lighting that kind of is often a feature of those liminal spaces, Twitter accounts. And this game is obviously really influenced by those kind of urban exploring type videos as well. So you're essentially wandering around this vaguely impossible space, so trying to find your way out, I guess. The game is very, very light on any kind of narrativizing of what you're doing. There's just a couple of bits of graffiti and sort of weird semiotic objects placed around the world. And actually in the whole demo, you only do 2 things, which I won't spoil because I think it's really worth playing. The space is beautiful, and even though it is often variations on the same theme, on the swimming pool thing, they find a lot of ways to kind of surprise and delight you. The things that you find, the changes in architecture, it reminded me in a good way of something like House of Leaves, the book, the way in which the space in that is described as that kind of mixture of impossible and plausible. That's a really interesting vibe, I think, to conjure. And as well as that, I was just very taken with how it sort of, your exploring of this space ends up sort of keying into your basic ability to read a space, to read architecture, to try and understand which is the best way to go in a given moment. And the game kind of confounds that instinct. And our instinct to find our way in and out of places, I think, is pretty fundamental to being human. And when we can't do it, it can be very upsetting and frustrating. And so I think the game zeroes in on that really, really well. You end up thinking, right, okay, so this pattern of doors and arches is repeating. So I should try and find a way to break that pattern by going in this door or coming through that door, or finding this set of steps that looks faintly different from another set of steps, or following this architecture that looks like it might lead to an entrance/exit. And I found it hypnotic. And I actually found it not frustrating at all. It's a very peaceful experience, lonely and evocative. And actually, that sense of discovering something that no one's ever seen before, or one person has seen before you, that felt really good. And again, I won't spoil what happens at the end of this demo, but there is a moment which absolutely scared the living shit out of me, in a way that a game hasn't for a very long time. So I will add that warning to playing this game, that it isn't entirely a benign experience. But it's really worth getting into, I think, and I can't wait for the full game. I think if they can recreate that sense across lots of different modes of architecture and biome and all that kind of stuff, then I think they're on for a real winner with that. I think it's a game that surprises you with what the experience of playing it feels like. I think it could very easily feel just facile and empty and kind of static. But actually, with very little, it's not full of music or sound or anything really, just with suggestion and hints and a lot of subtlety. I think they've done a great job at conjuring a sense of place that's kind of unlike anything else I've played before, beyond something like a kind of kitty horror show game or another indie walking simulator type experience. I also played the Pacific Drive demo. Looks great. I think other people will have better takes on that when it comes out than I did, but fascinating. I also played Star Trucker, which is a great title. This is the game that has as its kind of basic gimmick is its truck simulator in space, which is great. I had a good time with that, but I also found, the kind of horizontal axis, or rather the vertical axis of it, too much for me. Like, I love Euro Truck Simulator and American Truck Simulator, but that's because you're only on one level at any point, and I have trouble enough backing a truck in with that. If you add a whole new axis into it, it started to give me a headache. So I abandoned that one relatively early. The other game I want to talk about is Cryptmaster, which is just an unbelievably specific mixture of influences and ideas that, again, in a similar way to Rolling Line, just feels like just the product of some weirdo gloriously. And I just love it when games do this. So it mixes the VHS-based board game from the 90s, Atmosphere, of which I was a proud owner, which was the board game where you would play the board game, but you'd also stick a video on, which would cause a horrible man at occasional moments to go, "Stop! Whose turn is it next? I'm going to do something awful." It was that kind of thing. But I kind of loved it, even though after a while you could know when the moments were going to come on the VHS, and intrepid kids could, sort of game the timing of their moves to avoid being screwed over. Which was the true metagame of the 90s VHS board game Atmosphere. So Cryptmaster has that. It also has a lot of DNA in common with Nightmare, not least having Traeger himself read the opening narration, which I thought for a moment was deepfake Stephen Fry. I actually dropped a comment on the forums asking, "Have you done an AI Stephen Fry on this? I hope not." And they were like, "Oh no, it's Traeger. It's Traeger from Nightmare." Reading out a really brilliant kind of opening salvo. So that was awesome. Traeger is good. If you don't know Nightmare, look it up. It's legendary. And then the game itself is kind of a dungeon role-playing game where you walk on a kind of grid and you have a party of folk and you're exploring the kind of Underdark type zone, which is sort of beautifully rendered in sort of hand-drawn 2D as 3D stand-in kind of vibes. And all the while you're being spoken to by the Cryptmaster, who talks exactly like the Cryptmaster from Atmosphere, the VHS video board game. And the game is essentially about using either natural speech systems, so you can speak into a microphone, or you can type, to communicate with this Cryptmaster figure and essentially use letters and words as your weapons and tools to navigate this space. So you're literally typing hit to hit enemies with your sword. There's a good moment where you are given the opportunity to desecrate a statue of a goddess, and the Cryptmaster asks you how you want to go about it. I obviously typed in the word piss, and the Cryptmaster said, "Yes, give it a good soaking." And that then played out. So there's lots of kind of language, there's obviously a neural net system going on there, which allows for players to kind of express themselves in various ways. There's also, whenever you find a chest, the Cryptmaster looks inside the chest for you, and then you have to ask him questions in order to guess what he is looking at, which is good fun. Just a real weirdo nutso game. Doesn't feel like anything else out there. The typing into to communicate with a virtual being, I think, is something games have tried and failed at quite a lot over the years. It'll be interesting to see how this game pulls it off or doesn't. At the moment, it felt good. It felt nicely reactive. I don't think I typed anything in there that actually gave me a kind of, I don't know what you're talking about response. I think at one moment I used I think I might have said fuck, and the Cryptmaster said, why are you thinking about sex? All your relevant bits have dropped off, which I thought was a funny way to counter what I just said. So, yeah, just very unusual. Ends rather too quickly. I could have gone on for a bit longer with it. But yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how that game kind of develops and comes out. I think the demo itself is actually based on quite an old build, so I think they're quite a fair bit further along with it now. So those were the games I played in the Steam Next Fest, plus train games I played over Christmas.
And we're back. It's now again, isn't it? Hi, Jamie. Welcome back to the future.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed my trip to the past then, although, as you say, my body did not leave this spot. My consciousness did travel briefly back in time to when I was talking about Brio sets.
The listener that we have has enjoyed a full 25 minutes without me saying anything. So that's a big plus.
Yes, although they have endured 25 minutes of only me saying things, so that is a minus. I guess it evens out.
It's impossible to tell if that's good or not. The something that I wanted to kind of riff on, because I haven't actually had a chance to play any of the Steam Next Fest games, although I will say that I think we're living in an era which is very much, to me at least, maybe this is a personal cultural experience, quite well articulated if you talk about the experiential difference between playing with train sets to make yourself feel better and horror. Like that is an emotional range I can relate to quite powerfully at the moment. I thought that was both your excursions into train sets, physical and otherwise, quite relatable.
Well, yes, they give us, horror is sort of been well trodden. The idea that horror gives us a sort of safe place to experience the kind of the dark, the repressed, all of the things that we kind of, keep us awake at night. Horror gives us this language to describe them. And then model trains gives us the language to build train sets in ways in which, man isn't meant to tread on those tracks.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful experience of what it would be like to live in an ordered cosmos without the hunger of howling gods waiting around the corner at every turn.
Trains are, for train tracks and train systems, they're just a conspiracy against nature, right? They just imagine an ordered universe where we can move from one place to another, regardless of the fact that we do live in a blip in a void, in another void on top of that void.
I think everyone's happy to see a train. I'm just going to say it. I'll just say it. All right, like someone's got to. I think while I agree with you, I think I think about this in the context of like any battle royale game ever made. If it's got a train on the map, it's better if they remove the train, as they did with Apex Legends at one point. Get very upset. Playing the finals lately, one of its modifiers adds a kind of moving element to the level, like a series of platforms that float around. Functionally, a train. It's better if it's there. I think as an artifact of civilization, I feel like we can all get behind trains and on them.
I think in Bloodborne does a really good job of setting up this how a cosmic entity would kind of, it puts into practice something Lovecraft only really alluded to, right? The idea of how a cosmic entity might interact with the world, and the hunter's dream in that game, right, is this creation, this unholy creation by this Lovecraftian beast who you only see at the end of the game if you do a specific number of actions to get that particular ending, right? I wouldn't be that surprised if what that monster experiences from its perspective is too dissimilar from playing Rolling Line. Like I can imagine quite well the moon presence kind of sort of flitting around with its toys while it traps Gurman in this horrendous hellscape nightmare dimension, and he's also like puzzling over like changing the cloth or adding a couple more trees. At one point it goes on fire. That could be a toggle in Rolling Line. Everything's on fire.
Right. Yeah, I think you're onto something, because I think the duality of this experience is that at the moment, trying to get a train to anywhere in the United Kingdom for decent industrial action reasons, but nonetheless is an exercise in just exposing yourself to the whims of a system that is trying to die. And I don't mean that in the sense that that anybody is wrong to strike for better pay so much as it's a wonderful thing to have a public transport system that can sort of get people to where they want to be. And as soon as that gets kind of upset slightly by the whims of, in this case, capitalism, you end up in a scenario where it's like, oh, I missed when this worked. And I can sort of submit myself to this process, but I might just end up in a completely different city to the one I intended to be in. That happened to me over Christmas, where I actually had a wonderful time over Christmas through that exact crisis, because in that case, it wasn't a planned action. It was the weather, which is the other thing that can happen. If it rains a bit and, Birmingham ceases to exist locomotively, a sort of cosmic event in its own right, I had to kind of just make my way across the country, sort of manually getting whatever trains I would get. And in the course of 1 7-hour journey, 4 different trains I was on were cancelled, one after another, as I was on them. And it was like a kind of brilliant slow platform game, quite literally, just leaping from one, because eventually you stop thinking in terms of apps and process, and this train will get me into this place at this time, and then I can get this train at that time, and more like direction, like west or east. Like, I'm just going to try and get east. I'm going to aim for York and see what happens. And it was actually pretty exciting. This is what I do for fun nowadays, if it's not clear.
It can be quite nice, almost, in those situations to see how, you get to experience hysteria. Like that bit in Breaking Bad where Walter White's cackling in the crawl space because he's all the money's been gone or whatever. I can't remember exactly what the conditions there were, but sometimes I find it quite heartening actually to see how quickly people turn to sort of cackling hysterical sort of demons at the sight of all this sort of stuff.
Yeah, well, it is a relief faced with the collapse of the ordered system that you're planning on relying on to simply go mad.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. That is the line between a train set and cosmic horror, I suppose. The reason it was on my mind, and actually this is kind of related, is because last week I received probably the greatest belated Christmas present I will ever receive. The Lego House Atreides ornithopter from Dune. And I, despite all of my hobbies and interests and miniatures making and painting and all of that, have not been a Lego man in adulthood, which now that I've said that out loud is not what I mean. But you know what I'm saying? I, as a 36-year-old man...
It's lies, Chris. We all know about that time when you were briefly a Lego man.
Yeah.
Back in the late 90s.
Yeah.
I mean, your interchangeable hats.
Yeah. My interchangeable head. My head that... If I have to... I mean, there are certain things that are quite relatable. Like if I hide a lot of my actual feelings in the head on the back of my head that's hidden behind my hair.
Absolutely.
But
only 4 points of articulation as well.
Yeah, I can carry something cylindrical, but I will overbalance at the slightest notion.
I've seen you dangling off a spring.
Yeah, exactly.
A bendy bit in your hand.
Who hasn't at this point? Sorry. And anyway, so this I was charmed that this Lego kit exists because partly because I was a child obsessed with Dune. Dune is the first book for adults I ever read. I read it when I was 9 or 10, I think. And there's definitely that person that I once was at some point in the 90s would have enjoyed nothing more than this object. It is a Lego spaceship. It is a Lego set. And it is an ornithopter from Dune. And you were saying about playing Brio, which is another thing I loved as a child. But I was sat there. I started on Saturday and I finished it on Tuesday this week in bursts. And I didn't realize that part of my soul could be nourished in that way. And I could probably bang on about how I think modern complicated Lego for grown-ups is actually an amazing bit of product design. It's incredibly fun. But I was literally sat there building the complicated Lego Technic interior of my fully articulated ornithopter. And I said out loud to myself, and I live alone, this is the most fun I've ever had in my life. It was incredible. I put a Jean-Michel Jarre record on, and I just built wing assemblies and armatures for a big ornithopter. And yeah, like I say, something was nourished inside me that doesn't get doesn't get light or water very often. That thing is almost certainly neurodivergent.
Yes.
But it was nice to say hello to it and be like, look, now you get to play with also this hilariously long Lego Baron Harkonnen.
I can imagine. Oh my god.
He's a big floaty boy in a massive robe. It's so good. And since I've finished building it, I will occasionally pick it up, deploy the wings, retract the landing gear in the reserve room, fly it around a bit, and put it back down again. And then I noticed, this is now video game related, which people will enjoy, although they had 25 minutes of you talking about games, so it's fine. That this week, Microsoft Flight Simulator inexplicably added Dune mode. I don't know if you saw this.
I didn't see that, no.
You can fly regular planes on normal Earth, or you can fly an ornithopter around Arrakis, which is incredible. So I started getting that download. I haven't played that this week because
that is bizarre. Yeah. That game, for like the entire span of computer game history, has been entirely devoted to realism.
Yeah.
And just at this moment, for some reason, they suddenly take a hard pivot into madness. I love it. Right.
Yeah, you can rescue a little lost member of House Atreides from the desert before a sandstorm gets them. I haven't actually played it myself. I just watched the trailer, and it looks like, again, the most fun it's possible to have. But I don't it. It feels like, it's also very funny to me because I don't know. They've done something with the product design for the new Flight Simulator, where even though it's a modern game as service to some extent thing that you can download through Game Pass, and it comes down to the Xbox app, the process of installing it has somehow captured the energy of installing something on your mum and dad's computer from 16 CD-ROMs that isn't going to work. They've captured, there's menu music, there's kind of soft, lift music, kind of jams in the background as it kind of loads. And the juxtaposition of that and the now full screen advertisement for the new Dune expansion is, I think, aesthetically perfect in a way that that's the thing, is it captured the exact energy of me sat at my dining table building a Lego ornithopter and listening to French electronic music from the 70s.
Two things. So, yeah. I went to see Jean-Michel Jarre in concert a few years ago, and he was fantastic. Right. At one moment, first of all, the first thing he does is that he's got cameras set up on his fingers so that no one can say he's just pressing play and then sort of bopping around on stage. Right? Which is great. So he is actually playing everything. And the other thing he did, which is just one of the most rock and roll things I've ever seen, is he plays a song where his sort of part of the song, the lead synth line, is played by him breaking the path of an array of lasers, which are shooting out of the front of his keyboard.
Incredible.
And yeah, it was just absolutely wild. Fantastic. The other thing in neurodivergent news, I just have to mention this.
Yeah, sure.
Because I was in the charity shop the other day, and like all charity shops, there is a lot of board games in there.
Yeah.
And puzzles and stuff like that. Now, I haven't done a jigsaw puzzle ever, really. I've done many with my children, but I've never done a kind of grown-up one, sort of one with more than 24 pieces.
An adult jigsaw, if you will.
An adult jigsaw, absolutely. And I saw on the top shelf, and I couldn't help myself, I did buy it, which was an 800-piece puzzle of the Rosetta Stone, which has been put out by the British Museum. And I held it in my hands. It was £2.50. And I thought to myself, am I only getting this so I can make the joke to my friend Toby that once I finish this one, I can finally do the other two jigsaw puzzles I've got? And then I thought, yes, I do want it, and I am going to make that joke to him, and he's going to say lol to it on WhatsApp once I do it. But it's more or less impossible. I mean, it's completely impossible task. If you've ever seen the Rosetta Stone and quite how busy it is, I've really set myself a very difficult task indeed. I think I've managed to put together 3 pieces in an hour of staring at the puzzle pieces.
Scathing review of the Rosetta Stone there, Jimmy. It is busy, isn't it?
It's very busy.
Yeah, exactly. That's a vital missing link in our understanding of the ancient world, but it is also very busy. Lot going on.
There's a lot going on. There's a lot of languages to put on one rock.
I also really enjoy that Jean-Michel Jarre has kind of preempted criticism of his own performance in that particular way. I think that sort of loops all the way back around to being admirable. You know what I mean?
Oh, fantastic! Yeah, absolutely.
Rather than there being another way to demonstrate he's actually doing something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's in the grand tradition of people making music like robots, from Jean-Michel Jarre to Orbital to
Yeah.
Skrillex. I mean, somewhere along the way, people just stopped bothering pretending, right? So it's nice to see someone like that, at least pretending a bit. I mean,
Yeah,
still a fair
exactly.
bit coming off tape, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And identifying that there is a certain range of emotional experience that can only be described by, is there a laser? That's the whole feeling. Look at this. Cool.
It really was. It was a concert which every single song, when it threatened to get boring, which it did often, because it's Jean-Michel Jarre,
Yeah.
he would just bring out a new toy as if he anticipated that absolute to a T,
Yeah, it is. I listen to quite a lot of music in that kind of range at the moment, simply because it is sort of, I think sometimes your brain needs hold music. You know what I mean? Like,
100%.
I do not want to be provoked, thank you. I'd like to listen to just a formula resolve itself, Frenchly.
Absolutely. I listened to Lifted by the Lighthouse Family today 3 times in a row, entirely unironically.
I had a horrifying moment recently when I realized that part of my Spotify was like broadcasting what I was listening to like a group of people on Discord that I had shared it with, and that was fucking mortifying. I'll tell you that. Like, that's something like I loathed that, partly because I was deep in a writing deadline at the time, and I think I had found like a new level of like, I'd kicked through a new barrier in my like new game plus run of like novelty metal and ended up in a place that was very strange and didn't feel good about it. But anyway, we've been talking about this for quite a long time. We should talk about a genuine, for my money, surprising game of the year or contender already. Also, I mangled that sentence, didn't I, Jamie?
No, I got you.
Cool.
The feeling came through, if not the content.
So yeah, there's like, I thought that the next time I was on the pod, it would be all about my honor mode Baldur's Gate run, which is going well. I'm really enjoying it. I'll probably come back and talk about it at some point, because that game remains amazing. But Helldivers 2 came out, and it's fucking great.
It's so good. It's the first game since Baldur's Gate, which I played on release last year, which it has had that effect on me where you're sort of doing your everyday life stuff and you're like, stupid everyday daily life. I'm going to go back to my real job, being a space marine for a fascist organization, calling in airstrikes constantly. The sort of game that makes you vaguely irritable to be a human being with a real body.
Right, particularly because so we should probably like, just to kind of, I imagine it's everywhere at the moment. I imagine people are familiar with what it is, but if you're not familiar, Helldivers 2 is the sequel to Helldivers 1, which was the game that the Magicka devs did after Magicka. And if you're familiar with Magicka, which was the kind of like over complicated, but for comedic purposes, like isometric wizard co-op adventure game from about 12 years ago now. Then Arrowhead kind of very swiftly got themselves this reputation for building these like really playful co-op systems. And then Helldivers came along, which was a twin stick shooter, isometric, with a kind of strong Starship Troopers influence, which has never been more strong as strong as it is in the sequel. It was very popular, and then it kind of went away for the better part of a decade and has returned as now a really beautiful third-person shooter with a lot of the same mechanics, and we can get into more detail, but effectively a live service shooter about dropping onto alien worlds in a drop pod, all of which are comically hostile through one or two factions, the kind of flagship one being the kind of the bug faction, which I can never remember what their name is because it is like just like the Iceland brand Tyranids. Like, I think is it Terranids? No. It's close enough though.
Something, yes, possibly.
Yeah. I can never, like, I can't hold it in my head in exactly the same way that I can't hold the Deus Ex theme and the music, the old X-Men cartoon theme in my head at the same time.
Oh yeah, I see that, yeah.
Because they're the same. But yeah, and there's a lot I'd love to unpack about why it's such a success, but I think the thing that I would lead with is I have this theory that I'll bang on about a bunch generally, but I think games as a whole, as a medium particularly, are always in danger of being less than the sum of their parts as such a big multidisciplinary thing. And really, occasionally, when they're really special, manage to be more than the sum of their parts through a lot of small, clever decisions. I think of the games that I've played lately, Helldivers 2 is a really good example of that. Like taking a small number of parts. Some of those parts are individually unpopular in other contexts as well, like the live service model, like the online only model, and making them all like essential to something that rises above that set of limitations.
Yeah, I think it's a game you can learn how to play in a couple of minutes, and it doesn't seem to me like that ever really changes across play. The platform on which you're playing is really quite small, but actually it makes real virtue in simplicity like that, and it's just an immediately grokkable, immediately kind of your relationship with the game is established so well, so quickly, that it becomes this kind of just a very grabby experience. Essentially, you're never, you know what your relationship with this game is going to be, and it's a great one.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you can, the premise, like 4-player co-op alien shooter, covers most of it, but all of the details are executed really well. Like, in a fundamental way, they have, I think it's probably the best third person shooter in terms of feel and fundamental mechanics that I've played in ages. I've seen people compare it to Metal Gear Solid 5 in that regard, and I think that's a good comparison. Very different game, but in terms of like, feels really good, and you've got a lot of freedom of movement. You've got a lot of kind of interrelated sort of weapon and equipment systems that feel really good to use. And crucially, it is built for scale. So the worlds are pretty big and creatures get pretty big and appear in huge numbers. And that allows them to scale the difficulty really spectacularly without ever taking away from the lethality of your weapons. Like, it's a really lethal game. You can't take very many hits without dying, but also like the basic bugs and stuff like that will get absolutely shredded by, one shot from a powerful rifle or a burst of fire from a submachine gun or something like that. And so it completely sidesteps the kind of the bullet sponge thing that a lot of co-op shooters use to pace themselves, in favor of, like, there are certainly very tough enemies and there are mechanics for defeating them, but you're always like blasting away at hordes of things and you're constantly receiving that kind of, you're constantly participating in that really fun feedback loop. And it's been a while actually since I've played a shooter that's executed that well and that consistently. And, it has such I love the way I think their movement model is great. Like, I love how heavy you are as a character. You can't jump, but you can mantle. You can dive and go prone and like roll around on the ground while you're prone. And like, it just seems
the thing
like
you do, like the second most, it's the second most popular thing you do in the game is throw yourself to the ground and roll around. I love it.
Yeah, and like, but the amount of like, the fact that like the enemies can like sometimes have their limbs blown off and keep crawling towards you, like, it reliably creates moments that other games would either have to script or would happen like once in a while. Like, it's a regular occurrence that like you'll be running back, you'll run out of ammo in your gun, you'll switch to your sidearm, blow the forelimb off a big bug, dive out of the way of an attack that would otherwise kill you, and then your friend shoots it and its body just kind of collapses on top of you and you crawl out from under it and stand back up and keep going. And it happens all the time. And it happens because of like some really beautifully like calibrated fundamental systems. It's really impressive, I think.
I had a great moment in a mission I was playing earlier today, actually, with just some randoms, where our mission was to go and blow up some eggs in an egg cave, and the only stratagem, we can talk a bit more about stratagems in a moment, maybe, but the only one I had at my disposal was the Gatling Sentry, which is bloody great. It flies down from the sky, pops up, and a big horrible machine gun starts firing at every enemy it can see. And all four of us were sort of advancing, and it was the Gatling Sentry was machine gunning away at the bugs, stacking up kills and stuff like that. And then it swiveled towards us, advancing on the bug location, and started firing. And in perfect, synchronization, we all had to like throw ourselves to the ground while it machine gunned the enemies behind us, and sort of commando crawl out of the range of fire, which was just this lovely moment of like comedy, emergent, narrative stuff, which is just completely glorious. It's hilarious and exciting and spectacular all at once, just through something relatively simple. The fact that what gathers to create that moment is like the fact that friendly fire is always on, the fact that your turrets can hurt you. There's the fact that enemies are converging at you from different angles pretty much constantly. Everything's set so well to be so volatile in such a wonderfully crazy and chaotic and explosive manner.
And it's fun because I really want to spend quite a bit of time talking about tone, but like the stratagem thing is like, so the stratagem system is you basically you're constantly unlocking new stratagems, which range from like orbital strikes to equipment to deployables like turrets, and you call them in from space on a cooldown by, this is very Arrowhead, by dialing in a Street Fighter combo, which it's easy to fuck up. But then that kind of like turns into a ball in your hand that you throw, and then it'll come down wherever the ball lands. And that is, it's lovely that is also like, they've solved the problem of like, I don't know, awkwardly targeting something in a third person camera by just having it be a ball you chuck that can roll down a hill and end up in the wrong place. Or like, the amount you get, like the sort of, it's a game that works really well with randoms, and I could talk about why, but the sort of the experience of like warning your friends, like, I'm about to do an extremely dangerous airstrike, run, like, and just throwing it and then pegging it in the other direction is very, very fun.
It also does the thing where if you fire up one of those things and then get shot and die, you'll drop it. And if it's a kind of airstrike type thing, it means everyone who's standing near you has to like peg it out of the way. Like a lot of pegging it out of the way of airstrikes in this game.
I love the way that, so also you're in these maps and you're usually there to do some primary objectives, and there's secondary objectives listed around and other things you can do that kind of increase the value of the mission that you've been on, including like closing bug nests and that kind of thing. But a lot of the little missions and things you discover have little mini games attached to them. Like they've done a really good job of turning like all the interactable stuff in those environments into like little games that you're playing about, like calibrating a radar dish where one of you can see the right angle it needs to be and the other one has to turn the wheel, or reloading an artillery gun that then actually becomes a stratagem you can use, and the types of shells you loaded into it and the order in which you loaded them is actually the order that they come out when you then use it as a stratagem from the other side of the map, for example.
Oh, I hadn't realized that. That's so awesome.
Yeah, it's so cool. It's so full of these little like, and this is one of the things I mean about like, because in one lens on it is it's the same call loop over and over across different environments, set of biomes in a procedurally generated sort of mission environment. And they know exactly how to add variety to those little objectives and the encounters with specific creatures to make that never feel like it. What it doesn't do, and we can talk about this from the way the kind of meta systems work as well, that perspective, is even though you play for 10 hours or so, you will have seen most of the things that are in it one way or another. But it has sufficient density of like individually delightful little interactions that mean that you don't get that feeling that you sometimes get from games of this kind, which is like, I've kind of done it now. I've kind of done everything that can happen in this, right? Like, and that's one of the things I mean when I talk about games that being more than some of their parts or less. Like, it's really hard to achieve that feeling of like, yeah, I think I've seen all the different weapons and enemies, but now I just want to watch. I just want to smash these elements together forever. You know what I mean? To kind of experience the various outcomes. Like I'm crawling up the difficulty levels towards the higher set, and because you kind of unlock them as you go, and they get really difficult. And I had like the first missions this morning. I had some of the first missions I've played where only one person has survived at the end. Only one person's made it out, and that like final desperate kind of flight for the evacuation shuttle at the end of the mission when you're the last one alive is like just an incredible thing, because you are so individually vulnerable that you can't really you can do individual acts of heroism at a certain scale, but when you're alone and there are no respawns left and your entire team is watching you, and you're just desperately sprinting for the back ramp of this escape vessel, and then it happens and everyone cheers, that feels amazing. And then when it happens again in the next mission, you're like, oh shit, this is actually special. Like, it's really, really clever.
Yeah, wonderful. I had a mission yesterday, I think, where I was in that position where I was like, again, it was very Saving Private Ryan. I was sort of stranded on the edge of a beach, with all of the bugs crawling towards me, and it was it's just a really good like snatching victory from the jaws of defeat. Like I threw down a bunch of landmines that I happened to have, and then a whole bunch of artillery strikes, and managed to peg it across the level. And like my kill count by the end of the level was like 270 bugs or something, compared to everyone else's like 60 or something. It was just insane. It felt glorious, and it kind of gave me a chance to be a sort of superhero, really. Just great. I want to talk briefly about the amount of artillery that is on option here. I mean,
it's lots.
It's lots. Like, it's funny, isn't it? It scratches an itch I was always kind of aware of. Like, calling down artillery strikes is always fun in games, right? It's never not fun. I think the fact that they just give you loads of them. They give you loads of them. They're on a constant respawn loop for the most part. They give you lots of different varieties, including ones which go out of their way to be more dangerous and random, which is quite good fun. And just like you've got napalm, you've got Gatling strikes, you've got ones that are sort of slightly less powerful but recharge more quickly. And the design and the sound design on them in particular is just absolutely spectacular. And when you've got like 5 or 6 of them all going off at once, it really is the kind of Apocalypse Now sort of vibe, where you're sort of everyone's being thrown around by the explosions. There's bugs everywhere, debris. It's just so visceral and fun and stupid. And even when you do end up killing your entire squad by accident by dropping a Gatling run on them at the wrong moment, it's still funny. Because the world is sort of set up for that.
See, I think something that's, I think, really cool about it, that I appreciate, we're really love bombing the game at the moment, is it manages this balance of like, well, one thing, it looks really spectacular, I think. Like, it's not the highest fidelity kind of game out there, but I think all of its choices with lighting and environments and various effects, it creates these moments that look genuinely amazing. And when all of the big, it has big bombs in it that make you go, wow, which is, as you were just saying. And there is something about that experience of like, it has those moments that let you feel like a real little badass, future soldier. And, that, like you were saying about it gives you, it's not shy about just letting you play with the most spectacular stuff all of the time. And there is something really particular about like, 4 of you walking up to the edge of like a big bug nest encounter, and all sort of deciding silently as one to dial in your latest like war crime Pokeball and just toss it into the hole and just start this big fireworks show. But I think something that's really, and then I had a moment yesterday, I think I was playing, and it was like a night mission in the rain, and it was a really hard one, and we'd burned through our lives, and it activated in me the part of my personality which I do regret sometimes, where it's like, I'm just in charge now, I'm the captain now, and start like saying like, we're not fucking about, we're going for this extraction zone. And there was a bit where like I called down a supply drop ahead of us, waited for my team to like, using it to kind of like try and like, hey, everyone gather up here, and then just keep moving, like open the map and pinged the extraction zone, and then threw a incendiary minefield call down behind us, in the path of this huge stampede of bugs coming our way. And I threw it behind us as everyone ran out the other direction, because nothing kills your entire team like an incendiary minefield. Also, partly because I do need to call him out for this. Dear friend and friend of pod, Paul Canavan, I think he just can't see traps and mines in games at this point. I've played enough Hunt Showdown with that man that, like, if I put it on the ground, he'll stand on it. It's the way it works. But in that case, we were like running away from this minefield I'd put very far behind us, and then, you know, a few seconds after I placed it, the bug started to hit it, and there's just this, like, these explosions of, like, you know, orange light like blossoming on this hillside in the distance, as like bugs we can't see but through like the gloom and haze and like a torrential rainstorm are just hitting it. And it was like genuinely really like beautiful, like as a kind of just a game moment. But the other thing I think about it that's really important is it's achieved something tonally, which I would majorly be a big part of crediting it for why I think it's, even in its early days, like it feels like quite a welcoming game, and a quite a welcoming community initially as well. And that's because obviously it's not shy about the Starship Troopers influence. The opening sequence of the game is 100% Starship Troopers. And, you know, it's also, there's a little bit of Warhammer in there, as we've said, and other influences, Terminator. But, you know, it has its tongue quite squarely in its cheek in a bunch of different ways. And, you know, there's a lot of lovely little choices it makes about, like, you're a Helldiver, and the thing you do at the end of the tutorial is pick up your Helldiver's cape. There's no good reason that everyone wears capes, except that the kind of the future super Earth, you know, kind of like sort of neoliberal fascist hellscape that you live in is treating you like you're a superhero, and they want you to feel like a superhero, so that you're going to wear a pointless cape. And there's this big ceremony where you get your cape, and then you get loaded into a cryopod, which is like one of hundreds on one rocket of hundreds, and all shot into space at the same time. And the understanding is that everything you're doing is pointless and your life is short. And so, you know, the characters are constantly screaming about liberty, and I love that they constantly say managed democracy rather than democracy. It's very funny. Like, for liberty and managed democracy. And there's little details, like you can set it to not do this, but when you die and you like respawn and your drop pod comes back down, often your character's body type and voice will have changed, which indicates that it's a different person equipped like the person, you know, what you're essentially building is not a character, but like a set of equipment associated with whatever poor sod gets unfrozen next. And so you're not like you're always punching up, which I think is an important thing. While also being definitely the baddies, which is a really like good combination of elements, while also kind of clearly engaged in a utterly pointless kind of war of attrition where like there are no heroes, while also in your own small way getting to do these little acts of defiant heroism against impossible odds. And I think there's lots of reasons that's successful, but one of them is that the game is not positioning you as like Dr. Badass McGuns, the coolest man in Gunland. And the enemies you're fighting you're not like doing something righteous. It's all kind of a bit grubby in a fun way. And that reframes your like successes and your defeats as like quite playful exercises in like, well, actually, I mean, I'll put it two ways. One is the game does not take itself too seriously, and that invites you to not take it too seriously. And I think that's really important for feel and for like how it feels to participate in an otherwise really difficult co-op game where players are dependent on each other and they occasionally fuck it up and drop turrets on each other's heads and stuff like that. And the other side of it is somehow some combination of all these elements, like its controls and these little soldiers with their capes on and stuff, is more than, and I play a lot of games with, you know, soldiers in them, it really feels like playing soldier. I don't know if you know what I mean by that. Like, it feels like it's got this sort of sense of like, this is you and three of your mates in the park having just seen Starship Troopers aged 10, and this is what is happening in your mind's eye, you know?
Well, I agree, and I think it's, Starship Troopers is an excellent kind of comparison for them to make. I mean, it really is actionably Starship Troopers, because, like, Starship Troopers is a movie about the spectacle of war used as a means of control, and it's I think it's a pretty much a masterpiece, that movie. Paul Verhoeven has a great thing where he talks about, like, when he thought someone would object when he had the psychics in his movie dressed in literal Gestapo uniforms, but apparently no one noticed. But, like, I think it does a really good job of, like, I mean, there's been a few Starship Troopers games, but I don't think any of them have come close to nailing that tone of, like, it's kind of nihilist depiction of late stage capitalism, where nothing matters and you're disposable, so you might as well have fun. It's like, it's a really good inducement to fun. I enjoy the way the game like fluffs you as well. So, like, you've got a ship which is basically the Normandy, and and like one of the people who you see on there says to you, "Well, I'm feeling so much safer now you're here." Things like that. Like, games hardly ever fluff you like that. And I just really
which is always really funny, because you, in that context, are just like the 40th person to walk out of that cryo freezer today. Like, I love that one of the first choices you make, you don't name your character at all, because obviously you're a disposable grunt, but you do name your ship, and that's from, like, a whole bunch of, like, it's not a free text window. It's like you have to pick the something of something else from a big list of words. And you can, if you like, be the elected representative of family values as the name of a starship. But the thing I really love about it is then you are, when you're selecting your mission, you're in orbit around, like, the planets that you're about to go down to. And there are just hundreds of these ships in orbit. Like, there's so many of them. It's so disposable. It's really good. But then, and the thing I think is really crucial is, like, there's this sort of, like, it's such an interesting balance. Then the moments when you're, like, loading up into your drop pod and being shot down into the surface of a planet, the way that the little cutscenes play out and the music is really badass. Like, it is like, it's interesting because the game is literally saying, like, hey, fascism tricks people by making war look awesome, but look at this. And then suddenly the kind of music kicks in. You're like, fucking yeah, wee, down to die. And, like, it's really fun. Like, there's the other thing we should talk about is, like, how it works on a meta scale, which is, it is a live game. They're doing some really kind of interesting, clever things with, like, almost like live GMing. But there's a war front across the galaxy at any given time. And it evolves in real time. And as players contribute wins to particular worlds, those worlds can be rendered safe or captured, at which point the game moves on to a new set of worlds. And there are, like, new modifiers all the time. So, like, rainstorms afflicting a planet that make it really hard to see and so on. That stuff sounds simple, but it adds up. So part of its satire is that you'll finish a mission and your collective sacrifice and trauma over a 40-minute mission will increment the progress of liberty on that planet by, like, 0.001%. And the game plays like a fanfare as it ticks up, almost not at all. And it has real fun with it. But that structure, while, like, as part of, like, a live game, creates this sense of place, weirdly, that even if you're only ever seeing a couple of other players at one time, the community as a whole is, like, really invested in these one places. And something we didn't say is that the game has two factions. One of them is the bugs, and the other one, which they don't actually really, like, they let you discover, is the automatons, which, like Terminator, like, the army, like Terminators plus. And
I find them genuinely intimidating, by the way.
They're scary, and, like,
really scary robots.
And they have guns, and so it changes the way the game plays completely. So they have to take cover and hide. And the funniest thing is, like, it's evolved a bit now, because a week and a bit after release, we've kind of pushed the bugs back in one sector of the galaxy, and the robots are now attacking in another. And so the big kind of global objective has shifted to defending against the robots now. But at the start, there were lots of bug planets available, and everyone's doing work there. And there was one system where you could push back against the robots, like far on the opposite side of space. And you can see at a glance that there are like 30,000 players currently playing missions on one planet, maybe 16,000 on another one. And for the longest time, there was about only like 2,000 players at any different time fighting the robots because they're really hard. And just that decision created this little kind of mood in the community that, like, the understanding is that the robots are harder than the bugs. Is that like everyone's kind of like doing their part, to quote Starship Troopers, in the kind of the bug planets, and 2,000 brave souls are in robot hell, like on the other side of space, fighting thanklessly. And the world that they chose for that was this like purple alien jungle of like almost perpetual twilight, where you're seeing these like leering red Terminator eyes through the trees constantly and being like, airstruck by another faction that can call down airstrikes on you. And like, it's like, it's really, I don't know, I'm really enamored of it. I think it's all of its systems coming together in that way. It's just really, really impressive.
Yeah, like the first time, the thing is like some of these things should lose their kind of their sense of power, but like every single time one of the robot drops at ships arrives, which it does so spectacularly, there is that feeling of like, oh shit, no! Like at no point does it become serene or easy. No. Everything is an emergency. I just really appreciate that.
Yeah, I really like that. So I think, and I think particularly like, I've only once or twice found myself getting like frustrated with how difficult it is, because it does a really good job of turning difficulty into a quality, right? You're like, oh shit, we're fucked. Like there's, we're literally like cornered and there's bugs everywhere and we're all going to die. And it becomes funny at that moment rather than frustrating. The only time I've really gotten frustrated was like every now and then I've had like a random teammate who is like consistently like call down airstrikes on their own team and stuff like that. And there's not a lot you can do about that, but I'd certainly don't want them to remove friendly fire, because I think it's a core part of the game's feel. What I will say, and I think it's the important caveat to all of this, is I think the scale of the success of the game is definitely take them off guard, and it has bountiful networking issues for me that are still quite prevalent, and a lot of my friends have had issues with crashes and things like that. And I know that initially when it launched, it kind of dipped on the Steam reviews because it was so unstable. It feels a lot better now. And like, I'm still playing it a lot and very consistently. But I felt like, given that we've done, we've really laid into how good this game is, I think it's probably also worthwhile saying that, like, I would not blame someone for like refunding it in that initial window and waiting, if it wasn't working for them, and waiting for it to stabilize a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm playing it mostly on PlayStation, and there's been like, I think there was like a couple of nights in a row where I'd arranged to play it with some friends and we were unable to, and that is annoying, isn't it, when you sort of made free time for something. But again, it's kind of understandable when something is, there's no, as far as I understand these things, it's quite hard to for companies to sort of insure against this stuff, really. So, there's an amount of understanding, which seems to be sort of community-wide, actually. It's, people have been quite patient with it, I think, because it is so good.
Yeah.
But hopefully they can get on their feet a bit more with that stuff.
I'm really interested to see. I have a feeling that it's going to be really sticky, like in terms of, there have been games recently that have been super popular and taken off really quickly, where I've been less convinced that they will hold on to an audience past a certain amount of time. And that's something I think about all the time. That was a cool room.
It's just a Kira going past my house on his cyberpunk.
Because of that thing, like when you've seen all of the mechanics, do you just stop playing? And that's where, a really compelling core loop can take over, or kind of emergent systems and so on. And I think Helldivers might have it in a really interesting way. Like, I know that, I don't know if it's not a game I've played, so I feel completely unqualified to offer an opinion, but I think it's a really interesting moment that this game has come out basically at the same time as Suicide Squad Kill Justice League. And both are angling for a kind of the same co-op shooter with persistent elements. Like, Helldivers isn't a looting game at all, really. But there's a lot that I find really striking about the reception of the two games and how that's kind of panned out.
I mean, I've played both pretty extensively. I'm probably going to save up my Suicide Squad takes a little bit for when they've kind of had a chance to settle, because I think it is a fascinating case study in exactly the kind of the issue of the time with regards to game, and I think Helldivers is a fascinating success story, and I think the two games kind of very interesting in comparison to each other. I think the promise of Helldivers 2, I think, is really good, because it's clearly a game they can add to. They can add factions and add areas to, and that's already an exciting prospect, even if it is a year or two off. Because you just know that they can kind of have that thing where they'll have a steady player count of committed players, and then they'll do an expansion or a DLC drop, or however they choose to do it, with a new faction or a new planet, or there's all sorts of things that they could add to the game. I think it seems very modular like that way, and then that will bring everyone back in for a big old shoot 'em up festival, and that feels just really promising and fun, rather than like Suicide Squad, which, as I say, we'll get into. But that game does not feel promising. When you get into the end game of that game, it feels like it's going to be boring, which is a real shame.
Yeah. It is a shame. Like, I'm interested in playing it. I think what I'll say about Helldivers is, you kind of to go back to that point of like, every part of it is designed to support the game that it is, right? From the world building to the tone to the mechanics to the progress systems, and I think that really matters and it really shows. And I think the observation I'd make recently is, I think audiences can be quite sensitive to when a part of a game is there because for reasons other than their immediate enjoyment. You know what I mean? Like, and I think it's notable that as a, it's a premium game, it's I think a 30 quid purchase, Helldivers, not quite full price, but nonetheless. And it has microtransactions and battle passes and stuff, but they've been really meticulous to probably execute probably the fairest version of that I've seen, where the battle pass system never expires. It's not timed. So they're less like battle passes and more like progressively unlocked progression buckets where you can kind of progress them each individually. There is stuff that's available in like a store for premium currency, but that premium currency is available. You gain a stock of it through not just the battle passes, but also through play. Like I think it's I'd be interested in, I don't know how many games have made their premium currency something you find in the world very often. It doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, it feels like something you'd see 10 years ago a bit more, but very much not these days.
Yeah, and that is, and quite frequently as well, like it's a regular pickup in like some of the secondary objectives you might do. And that is like an immediate goodwill generating gesture that I can't imagine is costing them much, like, because it's, there's a cool helmet I could buy, but I'm like 20 credits short. And rather than spend, I don't know, the minimum amount of like a $5 on bonus credits, I'll just play a few missions and I'll find that. Is like, it should be obvious, but that is a emotionally positive player experience.
Yep.
And that is not the norm. And I stuff like that is sort of icing on the cake. I think if it becomes like rock solid technically, then I think it's really got legs in quite an impressive way.
One last thing for me to say about Helldivers 2. I keep wanting to say Hellraiser. It's not Hellraiser. Helldivers 2 is that firing from the hip is fun and useful in it, and that's the first time I've ever seen that in a game. Like, normally, firing from the hip is the game's way of telling you that you're an idiot and you need to look down your sights like a man. Whereas this is the first game I can remember playing where when you're faced with a big swarm of bugs and you fire from the hip while backing away from them, it feels really, really good to do it. It's immense fun to do it. And that just feels like a kind of paradigm shift in hip firing mechanics in video games.
Yeah. I think the game I would call out there is Gears of War, which does the same thing.
Yes, that's true.
And but I think it's really smart of them to do it this way. Like I had a moment. my kind of current like selfish build, if I'm just playing for myself, really, is like a jetpack and the short burst jetpack and the anti-material rifle, like the big sniper rifle that fires like big chunky armor piercing rounds. And the big chunky sniper rifle that you normally have to aim down sights to fire is not the gun you expect to hip fire. But like I had a moment where I was getting charged down by like not a full charger, which is like the very heavily armored bug, but like I think it's like a hive guard, which is like
that's right, yeah,
pretty big armored bug. And I sort of had to like I hadn't seen it kind of coming towards me, and as I was sniping something else, and it charged me down, and I dived out of the way and hip fired the last round in my like armor piercing massive sniper rifle and just blew its head off. And it was like a fuck yeah me moment. Like it was like one of those like, and then because it covers you in like bug guts and viscera, like I'm then like covered in green goo, like trudging through the aftermath of my own little moment of heroism. And that stuff is just, it's so cool. Like aiming your drop pod when you come back in to crush the bug that's about to kill your friends, and then managing for once to not crush your friends. It's great. We've been talking about it for like a good hour now, and it's made me just want to play it.
Desperately want to play it. A rando, the Titan bugs in it, which are genuinely fucking enormous, which I really appreciate. Enormous. Titans, when you've got 2 or 3 of them on you at once, which was just absolutely bonkers, and someone managing to kill one of them by dropping a drop pod on his head, it was just hilarious and wonderful.
Yeah, we had a moment earlier where I knew that we were going to fight one for the first time, and Paul hadn't fought one before, so I really wanted to like set it up for him a bit because we had the mission to hunt one, and I was like, I had this whole plan of like sneaking up on it, like sneaking to where it was, and then like putting a minefield in a way. Oh god, we didn't talk about the team guns. So this is something that I love, like some of the guns. So you call down your kind of the upgrade weapons you call down in pods, and there are certain guns like it's a rocket launcher and an autocannon type gun,
big laser
come in two, and big laser that come in 2 parts, where you have the gun itself and the ammo backpack.
Oh right,
and you can wear the ammo. You can pick up both and wear the ammo backpack and reload your own gun, but it takes forever. Or you can give the ammo backpack to a friend, and then if they stand at your right shoulder, they will get a prompt to be your loader, and they'll attach to you and reload as you fire. And it is an incredible bond that is formed between a little soldier and the person attached to their shoulder feeding ammo into the rocket launcher as you desperately unload round after round into like a charging Titan as it kind of barrels towards you through a minefield. And then everything goes to shit anyway, obviously. You know what I mean? Because something unexpected happens and you're just running for your lives. That little sort of Imperial Guard weapons team moment is...
It's very good. So it's very much like a team building weekend gone awry moment, isn't it? Just load the fucking rocket launcher.
Yeah. There's a lot of like, I think that's the thing. The other thing it reminds me of a bit is, even though it's a very different type of game, is it has some of the sense of scale and cooperation in its landscapes of like, I'm trying to think of the good example. Like PlanetSide is not a good example of this, but would you know what it meant if I felt like it feels like a war game sometimes? Like you're dealing with huge numbers of enemies on so many fronts and bringing in so many like deployables and airstrikes and things that you are playing it strategically as well as literally just hip firing desperately at the bugs in front of you. Like
yes,
really good combo of those things.
I think that's absolutely right. It's kind of a game about sort of managing space and managing where the enemies are, but it does that kind of without even just effortlessly. You don't think about what you're doing; you just think about not dying, and that ends up turning it into a kind of rather excellent real-time strategy game where you are the soldiers.
Yeah, the game I'll compare it to is like a game that I don't know. Do you know the game Terra Nova from the 90s?
Only vaguely, I think.
Yeah, I sort of discovered it randomly because I found like a demo disc with it on for £1 in a shop in probably 1997 or something like that. But I was kind of obsessed with it because it was like a joint arms first person shooter, but with like the scope at the time of like an RTS. I feel like I said earlier that like 10-year-old me would have wanted no object more than a Lego Ornithopter. I'm pretty sure 14-year-old me wanted no game more than this, I suspect. Like in terms of the combination of things, like Starship Troopers plus on the ground shooter plus like almost a bit of Command and Conquer to the feel of like bombing the shit out of lots and lots of oncoming enemies. It's very good. It's very good.
It's a good game. They've done very well with it.
Yeah.
And again, just because every time I think about the game, it kind of comes alive in my kind of ears, my brain ears. It just sounds so good. The guns and the monsters and the barks and everything. It's just like playing it with a decent set of headphones is really, really fantastic.
Yeah.
I think the sound design does so much for it. Really, really good.
I feel like I've run out of things to immediately say about Helldivers, but it's fun to get like I think a reasonable, particularly if they stick the landing on the technical stuff, like a reasonable Game of the Year contender this early in the year. Like very exciting.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely up there. There's nothing immediately on the horizon apart from Shire the Wanderer 6, which most people are less excited about. But the entirely opposite game, which is coming out in a week or so, and I am just ludicrously excited about. But no, aside from that,
yeah. It's also interesting, I suppose, to wrap up that like we've just like I feel there's something I feel like given what you've just said and given what you said in the solo recording about both the train games, these kind of sedate train games that you're playing, this kind of lovely opportunity for games to be, and we joked about it earlier, but to be about like order and peace and like kind of the meditative exercise of like almost tidying, you know what I mean? Like making a lovely kind of creating a single, simple, beautiful thing, or that thing of games allowing you to explore feelings that you wouldn't otherwise feel safe accessing through horror. And then we've spent in the back half of the podcast lavishing praise on, in some ways, if you were to look at it unkindly, the most video game that has ever video gamed. Like, and I think it's worth calling out that like Helldivers is really good. It's also squarely knows what it is, and it's like, do you know what the modern vocabulary of video games is really good at? Starship Troopers. And often it sort of arrives at that by accident. And this is almost feels like this, like, not to be too pat about it, but it's almost this like precision dive into the like, to some extent, the bottom of the barrel of what games are as cultural objects. Like, we're just going to join the American army and bomb lots of aliens.
Well, it's
like,
the promise. It's the promise of fascism, right? The promise of fascism is that the world is in fact very simple, and it's just these kind of insectoid elements in it that need cleansing, and then we can all live very simple and happy and non-problematic lives. Fascism is the horror game / train tracks of the political spectrum. I think
right.
That's my theory, and I'm sticking to it.
The stupid thing is, I think that's right. And like it's interesting, isn't it? That like it is. Yeah, I think about this in lots of contexts actually, but shooters are probably the main one. Like games, you talk about games being like horror games being a safe engagement with difficult feelings. I think games in general are a relatively safe form of engagement, or they can be a safe form of engagement with sort of human experiences and activities that are otherwise absolutely abhorrent. And it goes a lot, shooters are the obvious example, modern military shooters are the even more obvious example. But like, I think sort of Helldivers is almost like perfectly pitched in that regard, right? Like it almost like sends up the entire medium while also being like the most fun I've had doing that thing in ages. And I don't know if I should feel guilty about that. You know what I mean? I was thinking about that like, what do I want to do with my evening? I just want to blast bugs with my friends kind of mindlessly, but I'm having a brilliant time. Is it good or bad? It's good, I think.
Yeah, it's very good. And this is how they get you.
Well, that's the thing, I suppose, isn't it? I don't feel like this game has made me more likely to do in real life any of the things in this game at all.
No. I'd quite like to call in an airstrike, but not on anyone. Just if I could just do it in the fields, like somewhere, and just
yeah. It's like the absolutely. I mean, I think I made this joke in chat, but it does have that air of like men only want one thing, and it's precision orbital strikes.
Yep.
And I don't mean to gender that in a way that's unfair, but to reference specifically that Twitter meme, but it does have that energy. It's like it feels precision. I suppose this is the double bind I'm orbiting with this last point. It feels precision engineered to speak to us as like 11-year-olds playing in the park, and it also feels like a profound depiction or slash parrot slash send up of, like, as you say, fascist militarism. And that just raises this interesting question about how we were raised, culturally, where it's like, wow, this reminds me of being a kid. And it also reminds me like of all the things I was trained to want. Orbital strikes. I think if I talk any more, I will just load Helldivers. It's like I've got Steam open, like right now. I haven't been clicking, but I could. There you go. Look, that was me clicking onto my Steam library. So we should probably wrap this up.
Excellent.
Well, that is all the pod that we have time for. If you would like to find more of these podcasts, you can find them at crateandcrowbar.com or on YouTube at youtube.com/crateandcrowbar. Thank you to everybody who backs the podcast on Patreon. You find out more about supporting the podcast at patreon.com/crateandcrowbar. And if you'd like to chat about this episode or hang out with our wonderful community more broadly, you can find them on Discord. The link for that is on our website, which again is crateandcrowbar.com. I have been Chris Thurston.
And I've been Jamie Britton, Ombudsman of Science.
Is that true?
What, that I'm Ombudsman of Science?
Yes.
Yes, it's true.
Wow.
It's the name of my spaceship in the game.
I should have asked you that earlier. Mine is Father of Midnight.
Oh, that's very good. That
Thank
definitely
you.
Sounds like a Sisters of Mercy album.
Yeah. There really is a good way of dialing in the tone you want. Awesome. All right. Well, that is all the pod we have time for. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you.